All right, ready to dive into something a little different? We're talking Zen Buddhism today.
Zen.
But, and I say this because I know what people picture, we are not getting all esoteric and incensey on you.
Right.
We're talking practical Zen wisdom, the stuff you can actually use in your daily life.
Exactly. Yeah.
And for this deep dive, we're going way back to the 80s and 90s, checking out lectures from this really insightful Zen master, Genro.
Yep.
He was teaching in Vienna back then, which I thought was interesting. And his whole thing is how to apply these Zen principles, not in a monastery, but in your regular everyday life.
Yeah, he constantly emphasizes that.
Yeah.
That Zen isn't limited to, shaving your head and sitting on a mountaintop.
Right, exactly.
It's about being present right where you are.
And he walks the walk,
Yeah.
He even talks about how tricky it is to come back to regular life after being on a super intense retreat.
Yeah.
It's like even Zen masters feel that pull to slip back into old habits,
Oh, absolutely. It highlights that tendency we all have
Yeah,
to kind of fall back into those routines, those
Yeah.
automatic ways of being.
exactly.
But the really cool thing is how Genro uses those everyday moments, like just opening a door, to explain these really profound ideas.
Yes, that's what struck me too, that example. It's
Yeah.
bringing that mindfulness, that awareness to everything, work, how you talk to your partner, even, like you said, arranging flowers.
He makes this great comparison. He talks about how in the West, we might just jam those flowers in a vase without much thought.
Totally.
But in a Japanese tea ceremony, that same action, it's elevated.
It's an art.
It becomes this mindful act, highlighting the difference between just doing something and being completely present while you're doing it.
Okay, now this is where things got really interesting for me.
Right.
Genro talks about sunyata, which basically means emptiness,
Okay.
and how clinging to things, whether it's stuff, ideas, or even our past experiences, that's what causes suffering.
Mm-hmm.
He even says, and this one blew my mind a little, the world as we see it is our own construction. Like, we made it this way, he says.
It's a powerful statement.
It really is.
He's challenging us to question everything, all those beliefs we have about how things should be, about ourselves, about everything.
So if we're creating our own suffering by holding on so tightly to stuff, then the solution is letting go.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm listening.
Not clinging to those desires, the judgments, the fixed ideas we have about ourselves and other people.
Easier said than done, right?
Oh, for sure.
Especially in this go-go-go culture. Right.
Right, exactly.
And speaking of, Genro makes this really interesting comparison between that fast-paced Western culture and the Japanese tea ceremony, highlighting how we've kind of forgotten the importance of just being present with each other, of those relationships.
It's a stark contrast that makes you think
It really does.
about how we can bring that level of intention and presence into our own relationships.
Because wouldn't that be amazing? But how do we actually do that?
Well, that's where Genro gets really practical.
Okay, good.
He doesn't just leave us hanging with these big ideas.
He better not.
He gives us concrete things to try, starting with simply noticing our reactions, especially to those little annoyances that pop up all the time.
Oh, I know those moments.
Right. Instead of getting swept away by, say, frustration or anger, he says, stop and choose acceptance.
Choose it. Like actively, consciously.
Exactly. It's about recognizing when your ego's taking over and making a different choice, steering yourself back to a calmer, more compassionate state of mind.
Which is definitely not my default setting. Not always.
Well, whose is it? Really? We all have those habitual patterns.
That's true. That's true.
But becoming aware of them is the first step.
Right, right.
And then we can start to shift them.
So it's like training your mind, kind of like you would train your body.
Exactly. He compares it to exercising a muscle. The more we practice, the stronger we become.
So what's the Zen equivalent of bicep curls then? How do we actually train our minds to be more present, more compassionate?
That's where practices like meditation come in.
Okay, meditation. Got it.
But it's not just about sitting on a cushion for an hour every day. It's about bringing that same quality of awareness to everything we do.
So it's like Zen is less about what you're doing and more about how you're doing it.
Exactly. It's a way of being, not just a set of techniques.
Which honestly can feel a bit intimidating. Like, can I actually live my whole life that way?
Well, that's where Genro's encouragement comes in.
Okay, good, because I need some encouragement.
He reassures us that it's a process, a journey, not something we have to perfect overnight.
Whew, that's a release.
And he emphasizes the importance of self-compassion, of being kind to ourselves along the way.
Because we're going to mess up, right?
Of course, we all do. But those mistakes, they're not failures. They're opportunities to learn and grow.
I like that perspective.
It's about approaching our practice with a sense of curiosity, with a willingness to experiment and see what works for us.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Genro encourages us to find our own path, our own unique way of expressing these principles in our lives.
Okay, so where do we even begin? Where's the starting line on this journey?
Well, he talks about a few key practices, and one of the most fundamental is mindfulness,
Mindfulness, right?
which, at its core, is about paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely. Our minds are constantly chattering away, pulling us in a million different directions.
Tell me about it.
But with practice, we can learn to quiet that inner noise, to create some space between ourselves and our thoughts.
So we're not trying to empty our minds completely.
No, that's not really possible, or even desirable, really.
Right.
It's more about changing our relationship to our thoughts.
Okay, how do we do that?
Well, he suggests a number of techniques, but one of the simplest and most effective is focusing on the breath.
That breath.
Yes. It's always with us. It's constantly changing, and it's a direct link to the present moment.
Okay, that makes sense.
So even just taking a few minutes each day to sit or lie down and simply notice your breath, that could be a powerful practice.
And if my mind wanders, which it definitely will.
That's okay. It's not about stopping your thoughts altogether.
Right, because that's never going to happen.
Exactly. It's about gently guiding your attention back to your breath each time it strays.
Like training a puppy?
In a way, yes, with patience and kindness.
Okay, so mindfulness, focusing on the breath. What else?
Another key practice is cultivating gratitude.
Gratitude? Okay.
It's about shifting our focus from what we lack to what we already have.
Which is usually a lot when you really think about it.
Exactly. Even in the midst of challenges, there's always something to be grateful for.
So how do we actually cultivate gratitude? Do we just make a list of things we're grateful for?
That's one way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also about really feeling that sense of appreciation in our hearts.
So it's not just a mental exercise.
No, it's about connecting with that feeling of thankfulness on a deeper level.
That makes sense. Okay, so mindfulness, gratitude. What else does Genro suggest for, bringing a little more Zen into our lives?
Well, he talks a lot about the importance of compassion,
Compassion, right?
both for ourselves and for others.
Starting with ourselves, because that can be tough sometimes.
It can be really challenging.
Right. We're often our own worst critics.
Exactly. So Genro encourages us to treat ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to a good friend.
Which is usually a lot more understanding than we give ourselves.
Exactly.
So how do we do that? How do we cultivate more self-compassion?
Well, it starts with noticing that inner critic, that voice that's constantly judging and criticizing.
Oh, believe me, I'm familiar with that voice.
And then, instead of believing everything that voice says,
Because it lies.
exactly, we can choose to challenge those negative thoughts and replace them with more compassionate ones.
So it's like we're talking back to that inner critic.
In a way, yes. We're standing up for ourselves, reminding ourselves that we're worthy of love and compassion, just as we are.
Even with all our flaws and imperfections.
Especially with all our flaws and imperfections.
That's a good reminder. Okay, so self-compassion and then extending that compassion outward to others.
Exactly. Because when we're able to be kind to ourselves, it becomes easier to be kind to others.
Makes sense. But how do we deal with those people who, aren't so easy to be compassionate towards?
That's where things can get really challenging.
Right. Because we all know those people.
We do. But Genro reminds us that everyone is fighting their own battles, facing their own challenges.
So that person who's being rude or difficult, maybe they're just having a bad day.
Exactly. And while that doesn't excuse their behavior,
Right, of course not.
it can help us to approach them with a little more understanding, a little more compassion.
So it's about recognizing their humanity even when they're not showing us theirs.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean we have to condone their behavior or let them walk all over us.
Right. Boundaries are important.
Absolutely. But we can still choose to approach them with a sense of kindness, even if it's just silently wishing them well.
Okay, that's a good reminder. So we've got mindfulness, gratitude, compassion. Anything else we should be focusing on in our quest for a more Zen-like existence?
Well, Genro talks a lot about the importance of simplicity.
Simplicity, okay.
In a world that's constantly bombarding us with stimulation and demands, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and stressed.
Yeah. Understatement of the year.
Right. So he encourages us to simplify our lives, to let go of what's not essential.
Easier said than done in today's world, but I get it.
It's about identifying what truly matters to us and creating space for those things.
So less stuff, less clutter, less doing things just because we feel like we have to.
Exactly. It's about creating more space for what brings us joy, for what nourishes our souls.
Which, ironically, often means saying no to things.
It does. It means setting boundaries, prioritizing our time and energy, and learning to be okay with disappointing people sometimes.
Because you can't please everyone all the time.
Exactly. And trying to do so will only lead to burnout and resentment.
Okay, so simplify, prioritize, set boundaries. This is starting to sound like a self-help book.
Well, in a way, I guess it is.
True.
But these principles, they're not just about feeling better. They're about living a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
And that's what it's all about, right? Finding meaning and fulfillment.
Exactly. And Genro believes that we can find that meaning and fulfillment in the simplest of things.
Like what? Give me an example.
Like a cup of tea, a walk in nature, a conversation with a loved one.
The everyday moments.
Exactly. It's about bringing our full attention, our full presence to those moments and appreciating the beauty and the wonder that's already there.
So it's about shifting our perspective, seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Exactly. And that's a skill we can cultivate through practice.
Practice, right, because this is a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And it's a journey that's worth taking.
I think so too. And on that note, we're going to take a quick break.
Sounds good.
And when we come back, we'll dive even deeper into Genro's teachings and how we can apply them to our own lives. Stay with us. It's like he's handing us this toolbox, right?
Totally.
And saying, here, these are the tools. Now go build yourself a more peaceful, fulfilling life.
Exactly. And he's right there with us, offering guidance and encouragement along the way. But he's clear that we have to do the work ourselves. He's not promising any quick fixes or magical transformations.
It's about showing up consistently, even when it's hard, even when we don't feel like it. It's about cultivating that discipline, that commitment to our own well-being.
Absolutely. It's about making those mindful choices day after day, moment after moment, even when no one's watching.
Because it's not about impressing anyone else.
Right?
It's about showing up for ourselves.
Yeah.
And, speaking of showing up, that story about Genro choosing to go back to Vienna instead of staying in that traditional Zen monastery in Japan.
Oh, yeah, that was a powerful one.
It really drives home that point that it's not about escaping from the world, right?
Right.
It's about bringing those Zen principles into the thick of it, into our everyday lives.
Exactly. It's about finding a way to be peace in the midst of chaos, to be present and awake in the middle of all the noise and distractions.
Which honestly sometimes feels impossible, but then I think about Genro teaching in the heart of Vienna, and it's like, okay, maybe it's not impossible, just really, really hard.
And isn't that where the real growth happens? When we push ourselves beyond our comfort zones, when we embrace those challenges.
I guess so. So if we're not running off to a monastery, how do we actually integrate these teachings into our work lives? Because let's be real, for most of us, work is a huge part of our lives.
Right. And Genro actually talks about this a lot. He says that work can be a form of practice, a way to cultivate mindfulness and compassion in action.
Work as a spiritual practice. That's a new one.
It might sound strange at first, but when you think about it, we spend so much of our lives working. Why not try to bring some of these principles into that realm?
So it's not necessarily about loving our jobs, although that's great if we do. It's more about how we approach our work, no matter what it is.
Exactly. It's about bringing that same quality of attention, that same sense of presence to our tasks, to our interactions with colleagues, to the challenges and frustrations that inevitably arise.
So instead of just going through the motions, trying to get to the end of the day, we're treating each task as an opportunity to practice mindfulness, to be fully present in that moment.
Exactly. And he even suggests that by approaching our work in this way, we can actually transform it from something we dread into something that brings us a sense of purpose and even joy.
Okay, now that sounds a little far-fetched. I mean, I like my job, but joy? Really?
Well, maybe not joy in the traditional sense, but a sense of satisfaction, of accomplishment, of knowing that we're bringing our best selves to our work.
Okay, I can get behind that. So how do we actually do that? How do we take something like, I don't know, answering emails and turn it into a mindful practice?
Well, it starts with simply noticing. Noticing how we're feeling when we sit down to work. Noticing the thoughts that are running through our minds. Noticing the sensations in our bodies.
Okay, so just paying attention. But then what?
Then it's about bringing our full attention to the task at hand. So if we're answering emails, instead of letting our minds wander to our to-do list or what we're going to have for dinner, we're focusing all of our attention on the words on the screen, on crafting a thoughtful response, on being present in that interaction.
So it's like we're treating that email exchange as if it's the most important thing in that moment.
In a way, yes. Because in that moment, it is. We're not dismissing it as just another chore to check off the list. We're bringing our full selves to that interaction.
And over time, Genro suggests that this kind of mindful approach to work can actually transform our relationship to it. It can help us to find more meaning and purpose in what we do, to feel more connected to our work, and to experience less stress and frustration.
He's not saying it's going to be easy, of course. There will still be challenges. There will still be difficult days. But by cultivating mindfulness in our work lives, we're developing a set of skills that can help us to navigate those challenges with greater ease and resilience.
And that's a pretty valuable skill set to have no matter what kind of work we do. Speaking of valuable skill sets, Genro also talks a lot about the importance of communication, both in our personal and professional lives. He even goes so far as to call it a spiritual practice.
It's about recognizing that our words have power. They can be used to build others up or to tear them down.
They can create connection or they can create distance.
Exactly. And so he encourages us to be mindful of the words we choose, to speak with kindness and compassion, and to listen with an open heart.
Easier said than done, especially when we're stressed or tired or dealing with difficult people.
Oh, absolutely. But that's where the practice comes in. It's about catching ourselves when we're about to say something hurtful or reactive and choosing a different path.
So it's about pausing before we speak, taking a breath, and really considering the impact of our words.
Exactly. And it's also about learning to listen deeply, not just waiting for our turn to speak, but really trying to understand the other person's perspective, even if we don't agree with it.
Which can be really hard, especially when we feel like we're right.
It can be really challenging.
Yeah.
But Genro reminds us that communication is not about winning or being right.
It's about creating understanding.
Exactly. It's about building bridges instead of walls. And that requires a willingness to be vulnerable, to admit when we're wrong, and to apologize when we've hurt someone, even if unintentionally.
And that takes courage. It's so much easier to just get defensive or to avoid difficult conversations altogether.
It is. But Genro challenges us to step outside of our comfort zones, to have those difficult conversations with kindness and compassion, and to trust that by doing so, we can strengthen our relationships and create a more harmonious and loving world.
It's like that saying, we're all in this together, right?
Exactly. It's not just a feel-good slogan. It's a fundamental truth that Genro keeps coming back to.
And if we really let that sink in, it changes everything, doesn't it? Our choices, our actions, they all have this ripple effect.
Absolutely. And that can feel daunting, but also empowering.
Right, because it means we have the power to make a difference, even in small ways.
Exactly. It's not about becoming some kind of superhero savior of the world.
Thankfully, because I'm not sure I have the cape for that.
Right. It's about those everyday acts of kindness, of awareness, of simply choosing to show up as a more compassionate and conscious human being.
So it's like that whole be the change you want to see idea.
Exactly. Gandhi said that, right?
He did, yeah. And I think Genro would agree. He wasn't just talking about sitting on a cushion and meditating. He was talking about bringing those principles into every aspect of our lives.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I always found refreshing about his teachings was his emphasis on humor.
Humor? Really? I don't usually think of Zen and humor going hand in hand.
Right. It's not the first thing that comes to mind. But Genro believed that humor was essential to a balanced and joyful life.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
He often said that we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously, that life is too short to be so serious all the time.
And he had a great sense of humor himself, didn't he?
He did. He loved to tell jokes, often during his lectures, and they weren't just funny, they often contained a deeper teaching, a way of looking at things from a different perspective.
So it's like humor as a teaching tool.
Exactly. Because sometimes we can get so caught up in our own heads, so attached to our own perspectives, that we forget to laugh at ourselves, to see the absurdity of it all.
And that can be a real trap, can it? Taking ourselves too seriously, thinking that we have all the answers.
Absolutely. And that's where humor can be so liberating.
Right. It helps us to lighten up, to not take everything so personally.
Exactly. And when we can laugh at ourselves, it becomes easier to laugh with others, to connect with people on a deeper level.
So humor is a way of building bridges, too.
I think so.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. But if we were going to distill Genro's teachings down to a few key takeaways, what would you say they are?
That's a great question. And it's hard to narrow down because his teachings were so rich and multifaceted.
Right, like trying to summarize an ocean in a few sentences.
Exactly. But I think one of the most central themes that runs through all of his teachings is the importance of waking up.
Waking up. What does that mean exactly?
It means becoming aware of our true nature, of the inherent goodness and wisdom that exists within each and every one of us.
So it's about recognizing that we're not just our thoughts, our emotions, our experiences.
Exactly. There's a deeper dimension to who we are, a place of peace and joy and interconnectedness that's always available to us, even in the midst of challenges.
And how do we access that place, that deeper dimension?
Through practice, through cultivating mindfulness, through cultivating compassion, through living in alignment with our values.
So it's a journey, an ongoing process of self-discovery and transformation.
Exactly. And it's not a journey that we take alone. We have each other, we have teachers, we have this ancient wisdom to guide us.
And it's a journey that's worth taking, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Because ultimately, it's a journey that leads us back to ourselves, to a place of wholeness and peace and love.
And who doesn't want a little more of that in their lives? Well, on that note, I want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the teachings of Genro. His wisdom continues to inspire and challenge us to live more fully, more compassionately, and more presently in each moment.
It's been a pleasure exploring these teachings with you.
If you're interested in learning more about Genro and his teachings, we'll be sure to include some resources in the show notes. And until next time, may we all find a little more peace, a little more joy, and a little more zen in our everyday lives.